I couldn't let any one of them hit the ground, but I had to catch them all at the same time.
Hello, and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, digital marketing dude at Hippo Direct, and as always, you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com for podcasting or digital marketing help. This is episode number 31, and we have something very, very special for you. Today we have Michael Rozen, the superstar NYC lawyer turned entrepreneur. He's been appointed as special settlement master for some of the most complex and historic cases in U.S. history. To name a few, notably 9/11, the BP Gulf Coast case, the Jerry Sandusky case at Penn State, and there's even more where that came from. On top of that, he even started his own litigation financing company called TRGP Capital. Huge thanks to my amazing girlfriend Dana for setting up this interview with her uncle Michael and arranging us to record in person at his place in NYC. If you listen closely, you may hear some giggling in the background, and now you know who that is. Let's get into it. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Michael Rozen, the CEO and founder of TRGP Capital Management, the international man of mystery, very successful lawyer who is kind enough to host us at his amazing place in New York today. Also, and I have to mention, he is the uncle of my beautiful girlfriend, Dana. She paid me to say that. But
Paid me too.
Paid Michael as well. But thank you so much for having us, Michael, and for coming on the podcast. This is a ton of fun and having a blast already. But I'm very excited for what we'll talk about today. But first, how are you doing today? What's going on in your world?
I'm good, thanks. I'm a tiny bit jet lagged. Just back from London yesterday. But all good. Lots of busy things going on in my life, and it's always the way I like it.
Back and forth. So how frequently now do you travel between London and New York?
Well, when you're in fundraising mode like we are now, then it's a lot back and forth to London. Mm-hmm. And so I'm generally 6 hours in one direction or another, either the West Coast or Europe.
Okay, so you probably don't get jet lag too much then.
Restless sleep patterns.
Well, appreciate you seeing us after a week of no sleep, so I appreciate it. But let's get into it. For anybody that's not familiar with you, can you give a little bit of a background of sort of how you got started in your professional career, some of the major things that you've been up to, and what's the biggest thing you're focused on today?
Sure. I'll be brief here.
Sure. This is a 4-minute podcast. So no. I'm kidding.
I went Tufts undergrad, Georgetown Law School. I got recruited to a large law firm in New York by one of my professors who was a partner at this law firm that I went to. I had a great experience, unique experience as a young lawyer there with partners who took an interest in seeing me do real things, not just research and writing, which is the life of a young associate, generally speaking. But I was fortunate enough to have two primary mentors who were super successful attorneys and great people who gave me a lot of leeway to do things. And the admonition I always got was, here's this thing, you're being dropped into this circumstance, and just don't fuck it up. That was always my instruction.
Words to live by.
Right.
Yeah.
Words to live by, right. Don't fuck it up.
So how did you then, given that position and establishing those relationships with mentors right away, how did you focus on not fucking up then?
So, it takes work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was always the kind of person who found school a little bit boring, but work exciting. And real life, tangible kinds of things. And as such, when I got to work, then it was work all the time. And so I did. I worked 7 days a week for years. And even now, I work every single day, but I have a much greater degree of flexibility around how much I'm working during those times.
So when you were at the start, when you were doing 7 days a week, was that full days? How many hours were you working?
It was 6 a.m. to midnight, 6 days a week. And then on Sundays, maybe just an easy 6-7 hours.
Right. But how about, so it's Saturday night, people are up to whatever. How did you keep yourself focused in that environment?
Well, if I wanted to go out on a Saturday night, I would go to the office earlier. So I tend not to sleep that much. And that's just been...
I get that sense now.
That's just historic. I mean, it's not that I'm trying not to sleep.
Right.
That's pure metabolism. So,
right, but you can run off of that. Like, you don't feel run down.
Right. So I would go to the office at 5 a.m. on a Saturday so I could leave comfortably by 9 o'clock at night, and then I could meet friends out. And by the way, I did that a lot during the week too. I mean, when you're younger, as you guys know, you know...
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have that luxury anymore. Don't shake your head.
I beg to differ. I beg to differ, but go on.
My niece is shaking her head at me like, no, you are not young anymore.
So nice.
So you would, it's fear of missing out. We just didn't call it that then. Right. And so I would work until whatever time I thought I could safely leave, meaning I had done enough that the next day I could produce the work product first thing in the morning to the partners or senior associates that I was responsible to. And then I'd go meet everybody wherever they were and stay up until 2 a.m. and get 3 hours of sleep and then wake up and do it all over again.
Wow. And when was your first sort of small win when you noticed, hey, you know what? I'm pretty good at this stuff and I could have a successful career in this path?
I was not lacking for confidence in those days. So
very humble.
Yeah, well, you said you wanted me to be truthful here, so
no, of course.
I always felt like I could do it, whatever it was. And again, I mean, there's a lot of fortuity that goes into being a young person starting out in a time where if you wanted to be a professional person, the paths available to you were not that great. You guys have much more flexibility. And, the way I look at it with my own kids, 2 of whom are in college, is, you guys do not have to have a traditional linear career path.
Right.
My generation looked at things as you went into a particular career and you stayed in it for your work life, which is something that was always scary and important to me because I never thought there was only one thing I could do.
Right.
But I felt like in those days, back then, that's a really long time ago now, gosh.
Well, now you're purposely aging yourself just to make Dana feel better.
Yeah, she's not bashful. That if you're given opportunities, if you're lucky enough to have older, established people in whatever career you're in, give you opportunities, then you should bust your ass not to fumble them. And so I busted my ass not to fumble them.
That's great. Yeah. Like a young tiki barber.
Yeah.
But
he was a big early days, right?
Yeah, I'm messing with it. But those mentors, you mentioned you had a couple mentors that were really important to you, and up to you if you want to shout out their names or not. But what were the biggest things that you took away from them, the biggest lessons you learned from them?
Well, they were, one of them is deceased. One is alive, whom I still talk with quite a bit. He and I ended up leaving. This was the professor who recruited me out of law school.
Yeah.
He and I ended up leaving this big firm and starting our own firm, which we had for over 20 years, he and I.
Wow.
Together. And so he's in his 70s. I'm in touch with him frequently. I have the highest respect for him. But he and the other man, both were men, but that was coincidental.
Right.
Different kinds of people. With a different sort of focus, but both very smart, both very personable in very different kinds of ways, though. But the thing is that they had a way of connecting with people. And whether it was people in court because you're speaking to a judge or a jury, or people in politics or in corporate boardrooms or executive offices, you have to be able to connect with people in a real way where they trust the things that you are saying to them. And if you're trying to guide an outcome, the worst thing that you can have as a skill set is a lack of trustworthiness. If people don't believe what you're saying, you will not get them to do what you want.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And now in the social media age, that trustworthiness is kind of amplified.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fast. So,
I mean, that stuff, I'm wary of media. I had this experience during 9/11 when my partner and I at the time were appointed by the Bush White House to deal with the victims of 9/11. And I was, among many things, responsible for dealing with the intake center that we established before Christmas downtown by the Trade Center site.
Right, yeah.
And my sort of government press minder made me give press conferences, basically to tell people on the outside how many victims' families were coming into the intake center since they weren't allowed inside.
Yeah.
And you get press writing all sorts of interesting things that are not necessarily precisely what you said, but spun a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so I became wary of dealing with the media during that period of time. I had young kids then. My partner at the time, he very much enjoyed the media give and take. Me less so. I've dealt with it a lot.
Right.
It's not my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I prefer to do what I do under the radar screen. People who need to know who I am already do. And so that has been the approach that I had. But let's bear in mind that he was 20 plus years older than I was.
Right.
Am. And had a lot more history with dealing with press, which in those days was, it was a nascent internet, but a lot of news press.
Right. So let's call it, really, you've been able to keep a low profile over the years. So
thankfully,
as you mentioned, what can you point to any things that you've done that have kept that low profile, even though you've had so much success in your industry?
I mean, I guess, conservative with permitting people inside my world.
Right.
It takes a lot to get me to trust someone. And I mean, somebody who is looking to investigate or write a report on or what have you. I'll speak to media, but more often than not, I do it only when the situation really calls for it and I have no other choice. Talking with you is nice, but for my niece, that wouldn't be happening either. So,
well, appreciate both you guys. Appreciate the.
Look, I'm restrictive with my time,
right?
Because if I don't see an advantage to a situation I'm in or to me, then I'm not looking for self-aggrandizement at all. To the contrary, so I avoid that when I can.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And thanks again for the interview.
Not at all.
Obviously,
this is fun.
I'm paying you billions of dollars after this, so
you brought in that bag of cash, right?
I did. We weren't supposed to mention the bag of cash.
Damn it! Sorry. So you can just cut that out, right?
Nope. No, we're sticking with that one. But that's a good transition. I want to get into more your background with some of the very impressive things you've done, like 9/11, the BP, the Sandusky trial. You've developed this reputation over time for resolving these complex, these multi-party, massive disputes. And sometimes you're a mediator, sometimes in different roles. But how did you get into that world in the first place, into that specific type of law? So that was my partner, this professor I've been telling you about, whose name, let's just call him Ken. All right. So shout out Ken.
Ken, when I was a first year associate, Ken was dealing with, actually when I was summer associate, before I graduated law school, Ken was dealing with the aftermath of Agent Orange litigation, which was brought by veterans of Vietnam War over chemical defoliant. And Agent Orange was just an umbrella name. There were a bunch of different chemical defoliants that went under Agent Yellow and a bunch of other names. So anyway, I saw sort of alternative dispute resolution then. I had no inkling that would be something that I would end up in. Right. It was just that I had exposure to it because Ken would let me tag along with him to things. And then when I came out of school and we were dealing with what was then one of the first big asbestos consolidations before probably the most brilliant jurist I've ever seen in my life, Jack Weinstein, who's a federal judge in the Eastern District of New York, who's an extraordinary human being. He was dealing with a big consolidation of asbestos cases and appointed Ken as what's called special master to try to resolve them. And I was there working alongside Ken to help do that. And that was the beginning of the Just Don't Fuck It Up. There'd be times Ken lived in Washington, I lived here.
Yeah.
The court sits in Brooklyn, and he would call me up the morning of a hearing and say, listen, I can't get there for whatever reason. Jot down these 4 things, talk for half an hour, and don't fuck it up. And so
there you go.
So I came in, I didn't have the age or the gravitas or the experience of him. And so I had to deal with people in a different way, which was trying to hear them out, trying to learn what their problems were, and then try to figure out, is there a path that you can navigate, twisty though it may be, to a solution that everybody can live with. Yeah. And I had to be persuasive because I didn't have the power of personality in those days. I was just a little, shitty little kid for the most part. But I was lucky in a different way. And this is like one of those pure happenstance things. I had gray hair at a young age, and people were not exactly sure how old I was. Oh. And so that worked in my favor.
Yeah. How old, if you don't mind, how old were you when people noticed the gray hair thing and didn't know?
I started going gray when I was in college. Okay. So I was salt and pepper then. Mm-hmm. And then it just became more prevalent. Yeah. And I didn't care.
That's really, really cool.
No, yeah, I didn't care. And it actually helped me. Right. And I realized that early on because people would try to guess at how old I was. And so I was in my mid-20s at that time. And people weren't quite sure. They thought, okay, he could be 30s, mid-30s. And that was a huge thing for me because a lot of the people that I was dealing with were 40s.
Right.
And so I wasn't that much younger if I was in my 30s as opposed to in my 20s.
That's amazing. So you have a lot to thank for gray hair.
Yep, exactly.
That's amazing.
Exactly right.
So, and a lot of these disputes are so complex, so intricate. For anybody, because this can be, I'm sure there's lessons that can be parallel to anyone in a number of different careers. What advice do you have for anybody that's getting started with an issue that's has so many different arms and legs, as one of my old coworkers used to say? It's very intricate.
Each problem is bespoke in lots of ways, right? The facts are really what differentiate one set of problems from another. Yeah. But if you don't know, first of all, you have to be fully conversant with the facts. You can't sort of skate by with surface knowledge. You really have to dig in. And second, you really have to get to know the parties, no matter how many of them there are, and what their interests are in outcome. In the Sandusky sex scandal with Penn State, fewer victims in a relative sense from other problems I had dealt with in my career, where there were thousands and thousands of them, but all really just massively impacted. Yeah. And I took the time to talk to all of them. And you had to speak to their lawyers, who themselves have different objectives. Right. And you have to know what the university is thinking and its legal strategy, where there are insurance issues that swirl around all of these kinds of things. And so it's not just one piece. It's like 3D chess. Yeah. And you've got to know how to play it. And if you're only seeing 2D, then you're not going to get to the outcome. You really got to be able to see a problem from all of its sides as best as you can. Right. And the only way to do that is to dig in and talk to the parties.
Yeah. And it's amazing. Everything kind of keeps going back to those relationships and the trust. It's so important on a number of levels.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Part of Penn State outcome was that too. I mean, I knew the lawyers for a long period of time. I was very lucky enough to have all of the sort of best and brightest lawyers on the plaintiff side, who are normally the opposition to those things, whom I had known through other litigations. So we started out with a baseline of trust. Yeah. And that enables you to speak honestly to somebody. It's never going to get to this, but maybe it can get to that. Can we move things in a way that allow me to accomplish what I need on behalf of the client or clients I'm serving, and you likewise to do for you?
Right. So which one of these monster cases, I mean, huge, everybody knows about, a huge impact, obviously. Which of these over your career has been the most challenging?
Challenging for different reasons, right? 9/11 was a seminal event in the history of this country. Yeah. Dealing with victims' families was really tough. And, I would do it from early morning until late at night, and then go home and try to have to figure out a way to deal with my kids in a happy fashion.
Yeah, that's some serious contrast there. From
the
stuff you're working on.
Emotionally speaking, that was just really tough. And Sandusky, not unlike that.
Yeah.
Lots of people, I gave a speech at Tufts a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. The thesis question was, what's life worth in a legal sense? And the answer is, it depends on who's paying for it.
Right.
And if you contrast the quote unquote value, and it's impossible to place value, we're talking about legal value, right? Mm-hmm. Compensatory damage, and the only way the legal system can compensate you is through money.
Right.
So that's in and of itself a terrible marker for the value of life. But if you're dealing with it from a legal context only, and you have to come to an outcome there, is an outcome without having everyone go through years of court system risk and uncertainty and invasiveness, is a certain outcome better than an uncertain outcome? Mm-hmm. And does that mean that value in a certain space is somewhat less than you might obtain if you went an uncertain route, but were able to capitalize on that? And when you have the taxpayers, in effect, footing the bill for the victims of 9/11 versus BP paying for the relatively few deaths and injuries. We're just not talking about environmental damage or
of course,
business or anything like that. But what is it worth to a big company, public company, and how the market is perceiving them and their market capitalization, which is important to workers who have stock options and pension plans invested in that stock, let alone the investing public. I mean, there are lots of things that go there, but just purely from, I guess 9/11 would have to be the most.
Yeah.
But, dealing with opioid stuff, which I dealt with before this latest round.
I was going to say, it's getting bigger and bigger, yeah.
So I dealt with, I won't mention the company, but I dealt with a company that's a serious player in terms of implication, and they had a bunch of problems. Yeah. And the kinds of things that I dealt with weren't just sort of a legal case that even if it took 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, there was a sort of regimented protocol to that case. These are things that are amorphous and exist in lots of different legal and sort of quasi-legal forums, both public and private. And so figuring out the way to navigate through to a conclusion, I use this analogy back in those days where I had to juggle a lot of balls, and it could be 20 or 50 or 100. I couldn't let any one of them hit the ground, but I had to catch them all at the same time.
Well, good thing you have 17 arms. So
that's right. This is good. No one can see me here. Those arms, it's hard to buy sweaters.
But it's very true. I mean, you hear about people wearing different hats, juggling balls. It's this same type of thing. There's just so much going on at the same time. It's amazing that you've been able to do that. And
it was a great challenge. And I've always been a little bit of a challenge junkie. Present me that challenge, I'm after it. And that's what keeps me motivated to this day. I love a good challenge.
You love rising to the challenge. So you mentioned something earlier about, particularly when you were working with 9/11, the Victim Compensation Fund, of how difficult an adjustment it was when you finish your work for the day and go back and be like the family guy with your kids and your family there. What advice do you have for anybody that their work life is involved in sort of morbid or extreme, just very tough areas, and then to have and present a positive version of yourself and not get drowned in that when you go back with your family? How are you able to separate those things?
I think I suspect that a lot of that is chemical. That is to say that whatever personality type you are, I tend to be very optimistic person to begin with. I tend not to live my life back behind me. It's always what's in front. And so always glass half full. And so if you have a personality like that and you can disassociate yourself from the things that you were doing that day because you have another part of yourself that you want to give value to, then to me, that's been the healthiest thing for me. You could ask people in my life whether I bring, in quotes, bring work home with me. And I guarantee you they would all say I don't.
Yeah, and I'm looking at a table where we're doing the interview now, and all the glasses are half full. So you're very, very true to your word. I have one more question on this area, and then we'll move on to some other stuff.
Sure.
So you were the point person for a lot of these funds and these big disputes. What was the process like for you being appointed? I'm thinking about 9/11, but for these other events as well, how did that?
It's really fact specific. I was the neutral appointee mediator for the Massey mine explosion, which was the largest mine disaster in the U.S. in many, many decades, resulted in the bankruptcy of the company and criminal charges against the CEO of the mine company at the time. And the affected population really impacted quite deeply. And the process that was set up was that each side would pick a party neutral, and then there would be a quote-unquote neutral. So I was the neutral pick. But I knew all of the plaintiffs' lawyers who were at the forefront on behalf of all of the victims there.
Yeah.
And I had worked in West Virginia before on other matters, so I was not unfamiliar to the courts there. And I knew of, reputationally, the lawyers on behalf of the company. And so then it was, how do you... So when I got involved in it, there was some rancor around it. Why bring in this New York guy when everybody else was quote-unquote local?
I see, yeah.
Notwithstanding that no lawyer of the renown of the ones who were dealing with this problem was truly local. It's just that they lived there, as opposed to me who lived here in New York.
Right.
And I needed the support of the various parties, and having worked with them before and having them trust you, having them say that even if they didn't like what came out of my mouth, they knew that I was telling them straight, was a critical element and has remained, even though I've transitioned from that career to another.
Right.
I value very much people being able to trust what I say.
Yes.
And so, I simply have never seen the value in lying about things. Everything, especially in this day and age, everything gets found out.
Yeah.
And so you'd best be able to look somebody in the eye and say, for good or for ill, this is my view on things, or this is how I see it playing out, or this is what I'm going to do. And you don't have to like it, but at least this is what's coming.
Right. Yeah.
So that's always been a boon to me, having people trust that I'm going to tell them the straight story.
Yeah. And so that just became part of your reputation over time.
Yeah. Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully
it continues.
It's on the record. Yeah.
Can you imagine getting a 100% open rate on your next marketing message? Well, you can with extra large postcards that are impossible to ignore. Hippo Direct can help you find the perfect list of proven direct mail responders. We can even help lay out and design the postcard for you. Check us out at hippodirect.com.
That's a good segue. You mentioned that you're sort of in a different career now, so I want to talk about that for a little bit.
Sure.
And you started a venture capital company in litigation financing. What made you in the first place start your own company in that world?
So let me just correct one thing. Definitionally, it's not venture capital. This is sort of esoteric, non-correlated asset class.
Okay.
But is akin to private equity. It's just the class of assets that we look to invest in. And what got me thinking about it is a period of many, many years.
Yeah.
My former father-in-law, very well-known and super brilliant man in the investing world. He and I used to have this running debate about the transparency of the markets. And his view was, and I think probably still is, the market is a great filter for information on a real-time basis.
Right.
Something comes out and it immediately gets circulated around and then priced into the value of whatever company you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I argued with him for a lengthy period of time, saying, in effect, that while that may be true in a broad sense, in the litigation world, when you're dealing with public companies, the market is terrible at figuring out what the real risk, the real in quotes risk is, and the value of that risk to a company. Mm-hmm. And so he and I would jockey around about that. And then we'd give examples of how I thought the market had mispriced litigation risk. And so I started thinking about it there. Mm-hmm. And then, while I did all these public things as a lawyer, there was a lot of non-public things that I did too. And invariably those involved dealing with companies in distress, mm-hmm. and trying to figure out the best strategy, working with oftentimes teams of super highly reputable and highly skilled lawyers as well, how to figure out the path to navigate through to solve whatever problem or sets of problems that a company had. And so in doing that, you're dealing with generally very senior executives in a corporation, many of whom are in those jobs relatively short periods of time, 3 to 5 year average.
Yeah, if a lot of turnover.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so assuming no misfeasance, malfeasance, illegality, amorality, nothing like that, just normal human nature.
Right. People
tend to think somewhat about and factor in how doing something impacts on you and what you want to do next, mm-hmm. and your career. And that's just normal human nature, right? There's nothing untoward about that.
Right.
But the difference between, especially in litigation where you talk about the fact that it's very risky, it can be quite expensive, and the time frame within which a result can be seen is lengthy and may outlive mm-hmm. the decision maker's time at the corporation, that the difference between the optimal outcome and the actual result can often be a big delta. And it was that space that I thought to invest in.
Okay.
And I thought that over a period of many years, I was sort of happily handcuffed isn't the right word, but I was happily bound to my own law firm. So it had my name on the door.
Right.
But I always knew that there was another path I wanted to take.
Yeah.
And this was something I referred to before, just having a singular linear career path was never something I thought would be my ultimate. And so I had been thinking about doing this for some period of time. Mm-hmm. Then I would over a period of years start to prep friends of mine who I respected to get ready to come join me. Get your own house in order because we're going to do this thing and I want you to come with me and be a partner with me in this.
Right.
And so that takes a period of time too. Then proving up to super smart, investors, can you actually do this? Can you translate one set of career qualities into another skill set? Can you demonstrate that you can be thoughtful in the things that you choose to invest in? Mm-hmm. Obviously obeying all legal and ethical strictures around it because I am a lawyer.
Right.
And yet be a productive investor while also leveling playing fields out there. Corporations don't like when smaller corporations can fight with them. They prefer to be able to bludgeon them with money out of the way.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of articles you can find about this phenomenon on both sides mm-hmm. of the equation. And it's an asset class now that is getting a fair bit of attention. It's still the penetration rate for litigation finance in the U.S. and outside is quite small relative to the size of the addressable market.
Yeah.
And it's super exciting for me and a challenge. And I was at a point in my life where I was ready to go. And Ken is 20 plus years older, mm-hmm. had a really super amicable wind down of our thing. And I wanted this new challenge. So I made it happen.
Awesome. And what's the biggest difference that you've noticed so far? What's the biggest difference in being a CEO versus a partner in a law firm?
Well, so many I can't even count. And most
Just
of
a few
them,
of them. You don't need to list all of them.
I will tell you that most of them I did not anticipate.
Really?
Managing valuation and audit and all of the third-party providers that I have to have around me.
Yeah.
Because of SEC rules and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
That is tedious in the extreme. And I'm not a big fan of the tedious, especially when I have to pay attention to it.
I don't know many people who are.
But here I can't escape it, right? It's my signature on things.
Right.
And so I spend a lot more time with that than I would like. I'd rather be looking at litigations as potentially fruitful investments, which isn't just, are you going to win or are you going to lose at the end of the day? That's sort of a binary choice, right?
Right.
But there are all sorts of ways that throughout my career as a lawyer, there are off-ramps well before the sort of binary outcome.
Yeah.
And part of seeing that is part of what makes a potentially good investment in a lawsuit. Obviously, the merits are key, but there are going to be lots of ways that litigations can go down a wrong path or a right path, and how you put your imprimatur on that within the balance of what you're allowed to control and not control as a lawyer on the outside.
Yeah.
So here, for purposes of the rules that govern lawyers, I'm not a lawyer in these matters. I don't represent the parties.
Right.
But I have experience, and my partners have experience that can be useful if the company who's plaintiff or companies or what have you wants to take advantage of that, but they have to want to. So you have to think through picking the right people to work with, who are going to whose judgment you trust and who you think are going to choose the right path to take a litigation to a successful resolution, both in terms of obviously what they want for themselves, but also for me and my investors. And so that part I love.
Right.
The dealing with day-to-day management issues, personnel issues, budget issues, how you value assets that you have on your books, very tough to do when there's no secondary market. If you buy a share of Coca-Cola at $1 and it goes up to $2, you've made 100% on your money, right? And so you can market, even if you don't sell it, you can mark it up based on what the public value is of that stock that you hold. Here, these are not assets. Litigation isn't assets that has already secondary market. So how you value them on a quarter-by-quarter basis or annually or whatever period of time you want to look at it is very suspect and fraught. And so I, as a conservative person, always think things should be valued basically at cost. That is to say, how much we put into something. And whatever ultimate value there is comes out in the fullness of time when there's an outcome.
Okay.
But because I can't independently value the assets that TRGP holds, somebody else has to do that. So we have a series of debates around that. And those marks are the things that get audited. So there are debates about that. And I did not anticipate any of that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You're juggling a lot of balls, as you've been known to do.
A lot of balls.
But for this is partly for my own knowledge and curiosity and for our listeners as well. Can you give sort of just a beginner's definition to what litigation financing is and what, like, if you could describe what you do in its the simplest form, what would you say?
Well, in the simplest form, it's essentially paying the legal costs or some portion of the legal costs for a party who either can't or doesn't want to. Corporations have all sorts of uses for their capital, and oftentimes litigation, paying lawyers, isn't the highest and best use of that, nor what their shareholders are expecting or wanting them to do. And there's tax treatment rules and all of that sort of stuff. But in its simplest form, paying for the costs of litigation, which can vary from small to quite large, on behalf of parties in return for some outcome that hopefully is productive, that leads to a great return and result for the plaintiff. they're lawyers, obviously, who are being compensated, whether by the hour or on a contingent basis, and for us and our investors.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm a big fan of long words, but there are a lot of long words that I'm not too familiar with throwing around, so it's great. All right, so let's pivot a little bit. Let's get into a different segment here. Think about inspiration and creativity, sort of what keeps your mind fresh, what keeps you going. You spoke a lot about your mentors earlier, so that, one of the things we typically talk about is people that are inspiring to you. So that I think we've covered a lot of material in that area already, but a little bit different from that. I'm curious, just in general, what do you do to stay creative?
I try to be an acute observer of the things going on around me in the world. Mm-hmm. That is both, what are my friends doing? What are new people? I'm super fortunate in that I get to meet a lot of people
right
all the time. And even though I tend to be a very private person and have a tight group of friends around me, but I have a lot of people I know.
Yeah.
And so what are they doing in life? This transitioning over the last 4 years or so with TRGP has brought me into contact with a different group of people, professionals that I didn't necessarily have exposure to before. I read constantly.
Yeah.
Whether it's bunches of newspapers or I'm a big fan of biography, historical biographies. So I read a lot of that.
Any particular biographies you want to name drop? Any that come to mind?
I'm reading a great book now about Churchill. There have been a lot of biographies about Churchill, but there's a relatively new one that's really phenomenal and tremendously well written. Mm-hmm. If you liked Moneyball, there's that author wrote not his most recent book, but the one before is called The Undoing Project, and super fascinating to me, and probably one of the in quotes toughest reads I've had recently because it's really dense subject matter, but very interesting and thought-provoking. Mm-hmm. And then just being observant, having your eyes wide open, whether it be social media, which I try to avoid. I'm not on it. But
we're
my
kids,
we've
been recording on Instagram Live this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So no,
I can show you my quote unquote Instagram, which is my niece can tell you I'm following a few people, but I've never posted anything, and the few people really are my kids, which they know about.
There's the low profile,
right.
Your low Instagram profile.
Right. So I'm not on Twitter. I don't do any of those kinds of things.
Right.
And that goes back to the media question you had before, right? I don't see the advantage for me personally, and I do not think I'm that interesting. Where people are wanting to
differ, but maybe that's
mankind because sitting on the other end of the microphone, but I don't feel the need to proselytize. And so that has no value to me except, but I like observing.
Yeah.
You're here sitting in my apartment now. This is probably the one time there isn't news running in the background.
Really?
In my office, my personal office, on the days when I'm actually there.
Yeah.
There is always a television on mute, but on turn to news. I want to see what's happening in the world because a lot of what happens in the world can affect things that I'm dealing with or can affect, outcomes that we're trying to model.
Right.
And by the way, it's fun. I mean, your age group, totally different than mine growing up. The things that you guys have exposure to is incredible.
Right.
And so I want some of that too. I want to be able to continue to grow. I'm 54 years old, but I do not consider myself old.
I was going to guess you're in college.
Thank you. That was very nice. You can stay.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But actually, but that's one of the things. So why? I mean, I'm like a social media nerd. Like I'm on it all the time. It's a lot of the industry that I do my work on. But part of what I like so much about it is that Twitter, for example, it's like my favorite news source because anytime there's breaking news, it's on Twitter first before it's anywhere else. And you can learn so much information and you can learn so much, so many insightful articles and stories and what's trending in the world. That's one of my favorite parts of social media is that sort of thing. So it's that same ideology you have. It's just different platforms of taking it in. So it's interesting how kind of things have evolved over time. But
as long as, your only news source isn't, Facebook
Right.
Not to disparage Facebook, right? There's a great business model and all of that. But
Right.
that isn't my news source.
Exactly.
And I'm not on Facebook. But
low profile.
but there are tons of news sources that you can have access to in today's world. Whereas when I was your age, you actually got newspapers delivered to your house.
What?
Yes, I know. Strange as that may seem. And I would get on a plane, and it was like the one time I could be detached from my BlackBerry. I had one of those way back when.
Shout out BBM, yeah.
Loved my BlackBerry. As my niece can tell you, right? That was sewn to my
Glued
hand.
to your hand, yeah.
And it was great because when I was baby lawyer, right, we had there was no such thing as email. But there was an internal,
it's crazy to think about,
firm-wide computer link. So you could link with your friends on different floors in the building.
Oh.
And, what time are you leaving the office? Do you want to grab lunch in the cafeteria? Things like that. But when you left the office, that was it. You had to get it from what was on TV on the news or what got delivered to your door the next morning that you read in the cab on the way to or on the subway on the way to the office. And now, everybody wakes up, they have their phone in their hand, and I'm on the phone a lot during the day. I really dislike talking on the phone when I'm not in the office.
Yeah. So
the phone is computer to me.
Right.
Not
which it
phone.
is, but it has all the same capabilities.
Right.
It's just smaller.
Right. So, just being observant to all of that is great. I mean, the world is an amazing place with innovation that never stops, and I'm just perpetually fascinated by that.
Yeah. And what about hobbies? So besides soaking up all this info, besides being a huge fan of reading and not social media, what do you like to do in your free time? Not that you have too much, but
what do I do? I work out to stay healthy. I play golf not all that well.
Well, see there, I can't tell if that's very humble or you're
no, that's not
actually,
humble. That's just real. That's real. And
Dana's like, yeah.
My niece's father can attest to that. But
you try. You get out there.
I like it. I didn't start playing golf till I was in my 30s. But it's a good game for business also, and that's men and women. I encourage my daughters to play also, and so I do that. I'm just not fanatic about it. Right. I'm not one of those people who's taking lessons all the time. I should be better than I am because I'm a reasonable athlete, but I do not spend a lot of time worrying about that, but I like it.
Right.
I read. I have a little wine collection that grew up as a hobby with two very close friends of mine. And we all started sort of liking red wine when we were in our mid-late 20s. And one of the guys said to the other two of us, we should all three collect together. And the two others of us said, we're too busy for that. Who has the time to focus on that? And this one guy said, I'll do it. I'll do the work. I'll do the legwork, and I'll go to the auctions and we'll buy odd lots defined as things that collectors or restaurants or what have you didn't necessarily focus on. And anything that was divisible by 3, we would divide up. And anything that wasn't, we would save and drink together.
So you got really good at dividing by 3.
Yeah. So I can do division by 3, yes. In my head without a calculator.
That's amazing.
And that grew into a bigger thing, just over time. And so, but I'm not crazy about it. To me, I don't invest in wine. I have it because it's a social sort of thing, and I can share it with people I love and care about. And so I do not have anything sacred in my wine cellar. If you come to my house and you point at this and say, I want to drink that, then we'll drink that.
All right. Noted.
Noted.
All right.
My niece sitting here at the table has been the beneficiary of that a number of times in her life.
He used it in action. Okay, so that's actually a really good segue, because the next thing I want to touch on is a fan favorite segment here called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week!
It's an intro to this segment.
All right.
So this is where we talk about a recent a campaign or marketing approach that you saw, and we chatted about it for a little bit. So earlier we were chatting about wine because, we could do a whole episode about wine if you want.
We could.
But you were saying some interesting things about how some of your favorite wines, the way that they market and use their email list and things like that. You mind touching on that for a little bit?
Sure. So my exposure is to wine all over the world, but California wines, when I first started collecting, were more accessible. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence, I grew to have an affinity for those kinds of wines. And there were always some of them that were more highly rated. And whether you accept that or not, what the value of ratings are is an open question. But if you were lucky enough to get on the subscription list to any of those, mm-hmm. and back in the day when I first started this, they produced in really, really small quantities. But if you were lucky enough to get on the list, mm-hmm. you had to buy off that list when you got an offering. And so I always paid and do pay attention to when I receive emails that tell me to save the date for when such and such a release is coming. Because if I like that wine and if I miss because I'm busy or I just didn't pay attention to my inbox or what have you, then that's it. I can be done.
Right.
And to get back onto a list, really, really hard because the waiting list for a lot of these wines is years long. And notwithstanding that the prices are significant these days, there are some wines where I enjoy them so much and my friends and family enjoy them so much, mm-hmm. and I'm the only one who has access to them, that to lose out on that would be less than optimal. Right. So I pay attention to those things quite a bit. And it's not like I'm on that many, maybe, 15 or 20 lists. And, I have curtailed my buying a little bit as I've gotten older. There's only so much that I can drink off in my lifetime. And I keep
we'll see.
Well, I keep telling my kids, do not expect to inherit any of this. I expect it to be gone in my lifetime, but we'll see.
So I find this fascinating because obviously the wine world is huge, but this is an interesting, I haven't heard many people talk about the email list and the email side of wine stuff. And with our company, we do a lot with email marketing and email lists. You personally, you mentioned there's like 15 to 20 wines and probably 15 because it's divisible by 3.
Okay.
But do you typically subscribe to a lot of email lists in other industries, or is it really just focus on wine?
I do not subscribe to email lists. Mm-hmm. But because I am on the subscription list for these wineries, the way that they convey things to you more often than not is via email. Same thing, car manufacturer, right? If I've bought X, Y, or Z car in the past, mm-hmm. now my name is in a database. And so I'm receiving things. So technological advance, I'm not a car person necessarily, but technological advances in automotive space, very fascinating. So if I get an email on X, Y, or Z car, might I stop?
Is that a brand name, by the way?
That is.
This is some new age shit. I'm excited.
It's very esoteric. You got to be super special to get on that.
You got to be on the list. Yeah.
So I pay attention to that. I do pay attention to the wineries that I like. I'll pay attention to art auctions. Mm-hmm. If there's an artist that I'm interested in, or gallery things. And this is all not because I've subscribed to it, but because, it's hard to escape that these days. If you go into a gallery and you've liked a certain artist and you want to be updated on some new works of that artist, so you'll give your email and then you'll get everything. Mm-hmm. And probably 49 times out of 50, it's an automatic delete for me. But the one time out of 50 that it isn't, I'm thankful for access to that and to have it be there and accessible. And
exactly,
you can translate that across, whatever your particular interests are. One of the great things about the internet is the ability to access information in real time. Right. So I like that.
Yeah, and these companies know, XYZ brand and all these other companies
that you've never heard of but exist.
They know, they know that the best way to reach you, even if you delete a lot, is email as opposed to your Instagram or your Facebook, right?
Right.
So we only got a little bit of time left, and I'd love to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A here.
Go ahead.
Questions all over the place. You ready for it?
Ready. Let's go.
All right, let's get wild.
Okay.
All right. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Mistreatment of people, right?
That's a really good one.
I do not mistreat waiters or waitresses or people who are in service industries, or I just don't get that, right? I mean, everybody's a human being.
Yeah.
That drives me crazy.
Right. How about quirks? Is there anything that, just a random thing?
My own quirk?
Yeah, like anything that your kids, family calls you out on for? Maybe Dana calls you out on for?
Wow.
I'm not sure.
Dana, you want to chime in and answer here? I would say that I'm a little bit fastidious. So things have a place.
Confirmed by
right? Yes, confirmed by my niece here. She's using a different word for it, but in the interest of not referring to myself that way, I would say that things have a place to me. I do not like clutter. My mother could tell you stories about that.
Your place is like fantastically clean.
Thank you.
So I can see.
So that would be definitely a quirk. I am a highly organized person.
How about you travel? You're the international man of mystery. You travel the world.
Sure.
It's been half the week in Europe, half the week here, depending on the week. What is your favorite place that you've ever traveled to, whether it be for work or non-work?
I mean, I'm a lover of cities. I live in what I think is the greatest city in the world.
Just a shout out to Big Apple.
But I love cities. So London, Paris, you really can't beat those as cities to observe people. They're walking cities. And I've really not, I mean, I haven't traveled as far and wide as I would like. I've been working. But the more that I branch out, I mean, as a country, if I didn't live here, Italy, to me, every part of it, north, south, mid, is just amazing.
Sicily, we'll throw Sicily in there too.
Yep, all there, all good.
Not the contiguous Italy.
All good. I was at a wedding of a business colleague who's become a friend this last summer in Puglia, and I had never been. So that's sort of the heel of the boot to that part of Italy, and it was gorgeous, and the people were amazing and friendly, and the food is exceptional, and obviously I love Italian wine, so
True. That's
good too. Although in Puglia they're mostly white wine, but fine, I can slum it there, no problem.
Slum it, of course.
So there's that aspect of things, and then if it's R&R, I mean the most gorgeous place I've been, although a really long time to get there, has been the Maldives.
Oh.
And that
I've seen pictures; they look fantastic,
amazing. But took the better part of a full day to get there.
Yeah,
but once you're there, and once you're over your jet lag or what have you,
it's quite the flight.
Gorgeous to be plopped down in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and what's beneath the surface of the water is mind blowing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Definitely on the bucket list there. And you mentioned you love New York. It sounds like you're a pretty big fan of New York. What is your favorite restaurant in New York?
Oh wow, okay. So my go-to is Barbuto in the West Village.
Okay.
And I lived...
Also bucket list now.
This is a great, super low-key place. You should go there. You should take my niece there.
Hint taken. Hint taken. All right.
When I was like 27 or something, I bought an apartment in the West Village. This was before the West Village became super big and expensive. And I was
maybe a little bit.
I was looking around for like a local place that I could hang out in, weekends or after work or whatever. And I wandered into a few places and they weren't the right fit for one reason or another. And then I ended up on 12th and Washington, and there was this place with garage doors, and it was like sort of this funky bar. And maybe a year later, it underwent a renovation and became Barbuto. And that was my second date place, always.
Really?
And to this day...
Well, I dropped the ball on that for second date, obviously.
And here's funniest part about that. So when I got married to the mother of my kids, who, even though we're divorced, I adore and is a great friend, we got married above Barbuto.
Really?
Yep.
So you must really like this place.
So I do.
Sounds
like
you
place.
like it.
Yep.
Well, you're a great ambassador for them. I'll have to check it out. And they don't let you know how it is. No, I'm just kidding. No, we got to make a reservation there soon.
Just wander in.
Yeah.
They're not big with the reservations.
Really?
Wander in. It's a really low key vibe there. And especially in nice weather, when those same doors are raised and it's indoor, outdoor, and it feels very European, and and the food is just consistently phenomenal.
Now my mouth's watering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great wine list. All good.
Okay. And thank you for, cueing the last question here. What's your favorite wine of all time?
I'm going to give you two answers to that.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm not
three?
I'm not a super fussy or particular. I can tell you that I have had some extraordinary wine in my life that I've been really fortunate enough to have exposure to. So, could you turn down Domaine de la Romanée-Conti Burgundy? No, you couldn't. It's ridiculously mind-blowingly good.
Okay.
But I am a huge fan of Italian Brunello. So I've had some really great Brunellos in my life, and I go back to the touchstone for me, which was California Cabernet, which is what I started drinking when I got first into wine. And so I'm lucky to have had some really, really amazing California Cabs, Bryant family, Colgan, Harlan, Arajo, Screaming Eagle. I mean, all the ones that you would think of that are just really big and full-bodied and awesome. And if that's your style, if that's your palate, great wines. Hard to turn them down.
Well, appreciate it with your expert sommelier tongue. I feel like
not even remotely close. I am not.
That's the humbleness there. But because we always do show notes for the listeners, we put notes from the episode, and we'll include some pictures as well and post it on our blog. But we'll have to do a post about the Michael Rosen wine list as well.
All right.
All right.
Well, I'll tell you what. You can come back and we can have a tasting of a bunch of different wines, and I'll hide the labels from you, and you guys can figure out.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
My niece has experienced that. We do that in the summertime all the time, right? I mean, it's fun to, and since I know all these wines since I've had them.
Right.
But particularly when my family is there and they may not have had a lot of these wines, it's really fun to see people's reaction.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, I'd love to be one of those reactions.
All right, cool.
Well, I think it's time to bring things to a close here. I just want to say thank you so much, Michael. This has been an amazing interview. Really appreciate you sharing your stories and all the amazing things that you've done, and especially for hosting us at your amazing place in New York. I mean, it's incredible. It's very clean. I'm not just saying that, and it's amazing. I think anybody would love to live or spend some time here. So really appreciate it.
Not at all. This was fun, actually.
Great. Cool. You weren't expecting it to be. But
no, I wasn't. Actually, I told you I'm not a big interview giver.
You thought it was going to be an interrogation. But a couple minor things here. Where's the best place for people to connect with you? Whether it be, it could be LinkedIn. It could be just your company website.
Wow, you're asking me for a thing that I don't normally want.
Or you could say, don't connect with me.
Anybody who wants to connect with me, I'm not that hard to find. So there is a company website that has my email address on it.
There you go.
So someone can connect.
That works. That works
connect
great.
with me that way if they like.
Perfect, and at your nearest wine cellar as well.
Yeah.
And okay, and then last thing here. Any final thoughts? Just a line or a quote that you want to end with. Anything you can end with. Wrap up the episode.
I think that trying to live life, recognizing that you only get it one time, and trying to be happy in your life. I tell my kids all the time, there's really no point to doing things that make you unhappy. You should want to have happiness in your life. And it's something that I think human beings crave. I would always say, to the extent that you are able, be happy in your choices and don't be stuck in a place where you're miserable.
Don't worry, be happy. There we go.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Holy cow. Thank you, Michael and Dana. That was incredible. And a wild thank you to our wild listeners out there for tuning in to another episode. After you do or do not reach out to Michael for your wine recommendations, here are some things you can do to make the most out of the Wild Business Growth listening experience. Number 1, make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you're not already, and take a few seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Number 2, soak up all the show notes at hippodirect.com/blog. Number 3, dive into the Hippo Digest. It's your weekly recap of creative marketing, and we send it out every single Wednesday morning. Number 4, connect with us on social media at the handle HippoDirect. And last, but definitely not least, connect with me on social media. My handle is Max Brandstetter. That's all for this week. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!